I'd like to come to the 3,000 secret committees. Some of you might have read some of the material I've put on the web over the last few years about this. It took some time for two of us, a Danish MEP and myself, finally to get the EU to admit that they were being advised by hundreds, if not thousands of people secretly. And the reason we suspected that this was going on was because the level of detail into which some of these directives and regulations went were clearly beyond anything anybody in politics could reasonably be expected to understand. The minutiae was astounding at times. Anyway, we eventually discovered, and they would not tell us any of the detail, that the 27 commissions between them were being advised by 3,000 secret committees. 3,000, ladies and gentlemen. We couldn't find out who was on them, but we knew that they were people with expertise in various fields, professors, academics, various authorities of that kind, probably senior civil servants in other countries. And we also were told no more than the working titles of these committees. We were told that they didn't meet all the time, thank God, but even when they did, they were active enough to do a serious amount of damage, and I've just given you one tiny illustration. But we couldn't find out what budgets they were working to. We couldn't find out what agendas they were working to. We couldn't find out when they made any decisions and what those decisions were and why and on what legal or other basis those decisions might have been reached. We were allowed only to know A, that they existed, and B, what they were called. And I was given that information in French. Every single one of them was listed in French. My wife, who happens to be a linguist, spent several weeks translating the whole lot, and they all eventually went on my website. But apart from just finding out that they were there, the most important thing is that these people, like the commission they were advising, none of them had ever been elected. And furthermore, we had no means, as members of this charade called the European Parliament, we had no means of getting rid of them. And they're all still there today, I'm quite sure. In fact, the numbers may well have gone up. So that's the kind of juggernaut that we're up against. Now I want to come to the money. How many bank accounts do you think the European Union has? Anybody want to hazard a guess?
5,000.
Well,
Hundreds.
you had the right idea, sir, but you got the wrong number. 662 bank accounts in 45 different countries. And that's what they admitted to. We also were told, and here's a wonderful piece of mischief making in terms of language, also we were told we have dealings with 214,000 other bank accounts around the world. We were never able to find out what the words dealings with meant. But we are talking about a gigantic amount of money, ours, much of it, sloshing around the world, and I'm going to come on to the fact that most of it is unaccounted for. One of the other things that came to light when I first got to Brussels, and I was very, very well advised by a number of extremely hard-working skeptics who I hired as my research and investigative team when I got there, and they stayed with me for the 5 years, most of them, and they did a fantastic job. One of them was a forensic accountant.
Yeah.
And he discovered, when we were given the 2004 accounts, he discovered that in fact the balance sheet had the pension liabilities and assets on both sides. Now, I'm not an accountant, so I don't understand exactly what the significance of this was, but anyway, they'd managed to avoid showing that there was this huge hole in their accounts by somehow having the pension liabilities and theoretical assets on the same balance sheet, so that they wiped themselves out in effect. Now, eventually, we managed to persuade, we being the European Parliament, one of the few things we did manage to do was to persuade the European Union to move on to a modern form of bookkeeping called double entry. Before that, they'd used what was known as single entry. Now, I should explain that double entry bookkeeping was invented by a monk 1500 years ago, but the European Union got round to using it in 2005. And one of the curious things that occurred when they switched from one system to the other was that they were unable to reconcile the closing balances on the original system, which means that the opening balances on the new system were unknown. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is one of the reasons why the European Union's accounts can never be signed off, because they don't know what the starting line was. We also discovered that the average number of accounts and transactions that was audited by the Court of Auditors, which are mostly political appointees, by the way, they're not accountants. The average number of transactions that were audited each year was less than 1%. And the excuse given was that there were so many, it was impossible to do more than that. Now, if you talk to any reputable firm of accountants, they will tell you that at least 5% of a reputable business accounts would normally be investigated thoroughly and audited to the last penny. But the European Union seems to think that 1% is sufficient. And the other piece of happy news I have to tell you, this again came out of our investigations, is that if they find a discrepancy that is less than 1 million euros, it is written off. They don't bother with it. It is just simply written off. The fact that it's our tax money counts for nothing. As a result of our inquiries into the manner in which the European Union's accounts were managed, I found myself eventually asking Barroso, the President of the Commission, when he intended to introduce any kind of cost-benefit analysis before they introduced or spent money on specific projects. And I got the most astonishing answer, which I still find mind-boggling. I mean, how the man had the nerve to write it, I shall never know. He said, the reason why we don't do that is because the costs and the benefits will be different in each country. Therefore, we don't bother. Can you believe it? Attempt to justify commercially or financially what they spend the money on. None. That is the reason.